Would you like to start your own podcast? Or do you already have a podcast but wish you could focus more on recording great content and spend less time on all of the technical aspects? Fear the Beard Media wants to help you start a brand new podcast or maintain your existing feed absolutely free. When you join the Fear the Beard Media Podcast Network, we'll produce, post, and promote your podcast free of charge. That leaves more time for you to focus on what really matters: creating awesome audio content. If you're interested in joining the Fear the Beard Media Podcast Network, email us at fearthebeardmedia@gmail.com.
Football, the All-American game, is in fact a Canadian invention. The year was 1874, and the McGill University football team first implemented the modified rules of English rugby in a game with Harvard. The potent offense of today's game was not yet evident, and the game ended 0-0. In 1891, the Canadian Rugby Union was formed, followed by the birth of the Big Four, comprising teams from Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Our modern-day game certainly has no monopoly on competitiveness.
Welcome to the Daily Fantasy CFL Podcast. I'm Crazy Gaby, hanging out here with John Sullivan, as always, or I guess it was as always until the last 2 weeks. Our apologies for being unable to record. I had some things going on in my personal life. John had a vacation to tend to, but we are back now. It's week 8, and to the best of our ability, we plan on sticking with all of you folks through the end of the season. John, how the hell's it going, man?
It's going pretty good. A little hot over here, but...
That's just me, by the way. Happens to everyone.
Oh, excuse me. I might faint. I'm also a little bit hot in the wagering world. I had a successful 2-0 week wagering on CFL in week 7. I'm sorry we didn't have a podcast last week, but if you follow my Twitter, you know I post my wagers on there. And that actually puts me after an 0-3 start to the CFL betting season, that actually puts me now at 7-4-1 on the year. And good news for me living in New York that the governor signed the DFS bill.
Yep.
But I still cannot play. My understanding is that DraftKings and FanDuel and several others have applied for their temporary license, but has not been.
Yeah, that's what I hear, is that we're waiting on that application to go through, and that once that goes through, everybody will immediately be able to rock and roll.
So I'm hopefully maybe I'll get another lineup out this week, but I'm still not playing on the DraftKings site. So, but why don't we, since we're not going to go 2 weeks back, but why don't we go and talk about the games that happened last week, even though we didn't preview them?
I think that's a fair enough idea. Let's do that. But before we do that, I think there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, of course, we have the Olympics going on right now. And you being a wagering man, a wagering machine, if you will, have you done any Olympics wagering?
Okay, the first thing I'm going to say is no.
Okay.
And the second thing I'm going to say is I probably would rarely ever do that. And I'll give you 2 reasons why. Number one is only before this year in Nevada, where they have legal sports wagering, you were not able to wager on Olympics. This is the very first year.
Why is that?
That's something to take up with the Nevada State Gaming Commission. I have no idea. And number 2 is the offshore books that do offer Olympic wagers. They usually set very low limits and what I would consider to be heavily juiced lines. So there's a lot of vig or rake or whatever you want to call it. And it's just not attractive to me. And I also have a standing policy that I may talk about in a different podcast, that I really don't bet on anything that is judged, such as like gymnastics, where it's the outcome is determined by a judge's score, or something that is one person head-to-head, such as boxing matches, tennis matches, MMA. I don't wager on those. I'm probably in the minority. I know other people like to bet those sports, but there's the match-fixing problems in those sports are tremendous. There's a lot of issues with that, and that's even carried over into esports. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Do I know what esports is?
Yeah,
Come on
yeah,
now.
So,
yeah.
But that's something I just shy away from. I really have not. Part of the reason was I was traveling last week, but I really haven't watched much of the Olympics at all.
Huh.
I've been hearing stuff about green algae appearing, so I may.
Yeah, that was strange. I won't lie. That was extremely strange. You would think that out of all places in the world, the facilities at the Olympics would be the ones that were in the tippest of toppest shape, but.
All right, let's talk football.
All right, yeah, I'm sorry. That's 4 minutes wasted talking about something that absolutely does not matter. I agree. Let's talk football. And that leads us to the Tiger Cats versus the Bombers. Again, Tiger Cats, just not a fan of that name. I know you've explained it. But the Bombers, they weren't a fan of the Tiger Cats scoring points, it looks like. So tell me a little bit about this one.
So the Bombers won 37-11. This is the second game that Matt Nichols has taken over a quarterback for Drew Willie. Drew Willie was benched. He was a starter going into the year, and he continues to impress. I think, he was picked up last year from Edmonton. Mike Riley is a quarterback for Edmonton. He got hurt. Nichols started a bunch of games, and when Riley came back and they knew he was healthy, they let him go. And it just appears that Nichols in the starting spot is a better fit for the Winnipeg coach's system. Either that or he's just got a better rapport with the receivers. I don't know what the intangible is there, but when the Bombers score points and they get ahead, they're a tough team to come back against. They have a really decent defense. And we also had, for Hamilton, we had Jeremiah Masoli, the box of chocolates that I like to call him. You never know what you're going to get.
Yep.
And after the week before setting a record for completions in a game, he threw 3 picks, and he did have over 300 yards. But, of course, when you're far behind in the second half, you're throwing all the time anyway. So my takeaway from this game is that if Winnipeg can continue to score points on offense, they're going to be the team that I thought they were in the very first week of the year. A team that could contend for a playoff spot. So we'll see what happens. With the CFL, it seems like injury issues are such a huge drop-off in replacements. So it's hard, when you find something that works, you're on that precarious balance of, is everybody going to stay healthy?
Now, does that play itself out in the playoffs a lot as well? Like teams that weren't expected to do well will all of a sudden get deep into the playoffs? And
well, it's funny that you say that because last year Hamilton made the playoffs, backed into the playoffs because Caleros got hurt and Masoli was their quarterback. And he played decent games in the playoffs. They made it to the conference finals, or division final, I guess they call it. But yeah, I mean, it can happen like that. You can. It's funny, you can sign a guy off the street, but I don't. You can't. There's a trade deadline, I think, where you can't trade from another team after a certain time. So
right.
And you see guys getting signed off the street almost every week.
Well, maybe that means we have a future if this podcast decides not to work out. One of us can go and sign.
If either of us have Canadian citizenship, then our chances go way up.
There you go. I got to work on that. Rough Riders, Stampeders. 35 of the Stampeders, Rough Riders 15. Looks like another blowout here.
Okay, we're hopping ahead one game here, but
I'm sorry.
Sorry, let's talk about this one.
Yep, go ahead.
Stampeders won 35-15, and this kind of went as expected. Calgary is so good at home. Of course, they're undefeated at home, and Bo Levi Mitchell had a very above average game. He didn't have one of those super high performance DraftKings games. It was like 350 and 3 touchdowns, I think. But all the passing was spread out. I think only one receiver came close to 100 yards. Yeah, Marquay McDaniel had 100 yards. Everybody else had like between 50 and 70 yards. Calgary's just money at home. I thought the Riders would be more competitive. This game just wasn't close. I think the Riders actually came out and took a brief lead in the beginning, but Darian Durant was back at quarterback for Saskatchewan, and he concerns me. A lot of the pundits kind of think that, he's healthy. He's the man when he's healthy. I don't think he's mobile anymore. He's 34, 35 years old now, and he can still throw the ball, don't get me wrong. But I actually felt, in my opinion, personal opinion, that the Riders were better with Mitchell Gale at quarterback, the backup. He's like 26 years old. He's not considered a runner, but he's got more mobility, I think, than Darian Durant. So, but Durant did, he only threw for about 250 yards, but he didn't turn the ball over. He didn't fumble. He didn't throw a pick. So that was good news. But I really wish they would go to Gale if they're winning, if they won a game with him. I think they should give him another shot. Naman Roosevelt was shut down. I think he only had like 18 yards or something receiving, and he's their number one option. But Rob Bagg picked up most of the slack. He had over 100 yards, so he was the big receiver for Saskatchewan. This game, the spread was like 10, 11, 12. I think it even got up to 12 points, and it just, it's. I think we've reached the point in the season, and I'll talk more about this in the previews, where the favorites are going to start to carry the water the rest of the way.
Does that take us now back to the future of the BC Lions and the Alouettes? Again, another blowout. It looks like you didn't miss much not being able to watch all these games.
Well, yes. The first three games of the week I did not get to see live, and they were all pretty lopsided. BC, of course, lost one of their receivers, Nick Moore, for the year, celebrating a touchdown. But the rest of their offense is healthy and starting to click. Jonathan Jennings had another great game at quarterback. And that, again, from going back to week one, I said this was the guy that was a triple threat to run, to throw, to put up. And he's had a couple of really good games. But unfortunately, he's not 7,200 anymore. He's like, mid to high 9,000s now. So, but he had another good game at quarterback. Jeremiah Johnson is their number one running back. He's back. He's good for that 75 yards. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll get 100 yards. He won't get the goal line carries, but he might be valued depending on his price. And then an interesting thing from this game that I noticed was Chris Rainey, who I think is the second best return guy in the league, he split both the kick returns and the punt returns. And that's not something you're going to pick up off the depth charts. It doesn't matter if he's the first on the depth chart or the second on the depth chart. If he's only getting half the returns instead of all the returns, that makes him not nearly as valuable as he was earlier in the year.
Kind of like a New England Patriots wide receiver being listed at number one on the depth chart.
Yeah. Yes, everybody knows that feeling.
Yep.
So Montreal side of the ball, Montreal is an absolute mess right now. I told you that I thought they were the biggest question mark in the East, and their coach leaves a little to be desired. And they basically have no decent DFS options, and a lot of that is due to injury. They lost S.J. Green. They lost their starting running back. The Deron Carter is their only stud that's worth playing or paying up for. Their kicker is supposed to be he's the leg, because he's got such an awesome leg, but he's really struggled, and he might actually get cut. Boris Beatty. I actually double dipped on this game betting wise. I took BC. I think it was -3.5, -4, and I took the over in this game. I knew a lot of points were probably going to be scored. I expected it to be a little closer, but that worked out well for me. I did not parlay those. I played them separate. I'm a little bit of a conservative guy when it comes to wagering, but that game, after that game, I decided not. I had opinions on the other games, but I decided not to play them. But they all did. It would have been a gold week if I had played the last three games of the week. So that moves us to the last one.
Whoa! Easy there, Mister. This is my part of the. This is the only thing I'm able to contribute to the podcast since I have no analysis. So back off.
I was just going to say we were moving on to
all right. Just be careful. Know your role. That's all. Know your lane. That's all I'm saying here. Eskimos 20, Red Blacks 23. The only close game of the week. Tell me about it.
This was a very interesting game, and I watched this on TV. And Henry Burris is back. Trevor Harris got hurt, and Henry Burris is now back after missing 4 or 5 games with that hurt hand. He led Ottawa to a comeback win. They scored a touchdown and a field goal in the last 3 minutes of the game. They were down 20-13. However, before that, it was a close game, and he threw a pick six in the early part of the fourth quarter. Ottawa's kicker, Chris Milo, who you can always count on to miss something in the clutch, hit an upright again. And hitting the upright is first of all, it's not easy to do.
I was going to say, you'd have to actually be talented to choose to do that.
And number two, it's the worst thing you can do in the CFL, because if you kick a field goal, if it goes through the uprights, it's worth 3 points. If it misses and doesn't hit the upright and it goes out of the end zone, it's still worth 1 point. So kicking it and hitting the upright gives you nothing. So he's hit the most Chris Milo's hit the most uprights in the CFL in like the last 3 years. I'm surprised he still has a job. I really am. However, this game could have gone either way. The Eskimos ended up losing, and now they have a 3-game losing streak. But Mike Riley, the quarterback for Edmonton, got very, very little help from his offensive line. He was totally rushed he just didn't have any time. He did complete a lot of passes, and everything was short yardage, outs, screens. Ottawa was very bend, don't break on defense. They gave up yardage, but they never gave up a big play. And it seemed to work for them. The Edmonton defense was really their own undoing, because they gave up some really bad penalties in the fourth quarter of the game that kept drives alive, like roughing the passer and
the kind of stuff coaches lose their minds over.
Yeah, that's the thing about I talk about the disparity between starters and bench role players in the CFL, because they make so little money. They sign people off the street. Somebody can come in a game because of an injury.
Canadian citizenship.
Yes, well, they have to have 21 starters that are Canadian in order to.
Is that a labor law for Canada?
Well, I don't know if it's a federal law, but the league says you've got to have at least 7 starters that are Canadian, and 21 of your 45 players have to be Canadian. So, if somebody can sign a Canadian offensive lineman, well, then they can sign an American or international. They call them international running back or skill position. So when they can find, if they find a good Canadian quarterback, that means they can spend their international players in other positions. Also, this game was 57.5 on the total. I really liked the under here, and it came through, although I just didn't bother with it. So those were the 4 games for Week 7, and like you said, I don't think the Calgary game was definitely a stinker. That one was probably shut off after halftime. The other ones, even though they were lopsided, I don't think they were really, shut off before the fourth quarter types of games. But hopefully we'll get better, more exciting games this week.
All right, before we go on to talking about the games for this week, you did have a little bit of mid-season daily fantasy strategy you wanted to toss some people's way, namely how to make sure they are getting, I won't say the S word, scam, but I'll say make sure they are getting the best possible value out of their daily fantasy experience.
Well, I'm going to talk about CFL only.
Okay.
And then I'm going to talk about DFS in general.
Okay.
And now that we're approaching the mid-season, there's actually 20 weeks in the CFL regular season. So Week 10 would be mid-season, but we're getting close. But the reason I say mid-season is because NFL DFS has started to drop on the big sites. And what that means is there are a lot of people that were casual CFL players are now going to turn their attention to NFL, and they're going to drop CFL like a ton of bricks.
Or maybe they just won't be as knowledgeable when it comes to building lineups. Maybe there's an edge there.
Yes, that's true now, but I'm looking at it from a completely different angle.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry.
We've already seen in the last few weeks, now that NFL has dropped, we've seen a decrease in the CFL prize pools. I'm going to talk about my adjustment in midseason. What I've learned after 8 weeks of DraftKings CFL fantasy is that you're looking for the most possible explosive performances, obviously to get the highest score. And so I look back and I said, hey, where are all these 40-point DraftKings point performances coming from? Are they coming from the running back? Hell no. Are they coming from the defense? Hell no. Are they coming from the quarterback? Not really. The quarterback, all the quarterback performances on the season, I believe there's only been 2 that have either been at 40 points or above 40 points. And then they've all come at wide receiver. So I'm changing up the way I construct my rosters going forward in CFL. And I'm talking about cash lineups here, so keep that in mind. I would spend up whenever possible on wide receiver. I would pick those would be my guys that I would think that would have the most explosive games. I'm going to go wide receiver first, quarterback, running back second and third, depending on the matchups that week. But I'm actually thinking about spending much less at quarterback. The prices of the quarterbacks have gone up so much that most of the good starters are hitting 10,000 now. That you've got to get 30 points just to get value, and that's not happening with a lot of these quarterbacks on a weekly basis. So I would think I would rather spend down to 7,500 and try to just get 20 to 25 points out of my quarterback, and then spend that extra money on the wide receivers and hope that I hit a good combination of wide receivers. So that's how I'm approaching roster construction this week. So if you check out my Twitter page and I put a lineup up, you can see that I probably spent most of my money on wide receivers, and then I kind of faded. I don't want to use the word punt, but faded the other skill positions.
Not trying to go too deep into the daily fantasy vernacular.
Yes. For those of you that are still grinding CFL, going forward, now that NFL is here, you're going to get a really good barometer of your skill level playing against mostly other folks that are going to stick out CFL for the rest of the year. They're regulars, if you will.
Agreed.
And I still think for cash games that 125 points is a good cutoff for cashing a head-to-head. Although, as the season moves along, it will be interesting to see how tough the pricing gets. If the DraftKings pricing algorithm actually keeps squeezing everybody on the higher and higher salaries during the latter part of the year. So that could affect what the target number is for cashing a head-to-head going forward. The other thing I wanted to talk about doesn't really have to do with CFL, but it does have to do with DFS directly. And that is there was a lot of talk in the community, and I use that term loosely, about possible collusion in a Millie Maker PGA tournament.
Right.
And apparently, on more than one occasion and with more than one team of players, there were two or more users that max entered these Millie Maker tournaments. But what they were carefully considerate to do was to not have any unique lineups among the total that they submitted together. So
purely accidental, I'm sure.
Purely accidental. They both used. They admit that they consulted with each other, researching the lineups, which is not against the rules.
No, of course not.
They admit that they both live in the same building, which technically is not against the rules.
No, of course not.
Yes, and they both submitted the max 150 lineups that you're allowed to in this tournament. And by the way, they both had been suspended by DraftKings earlier in the past.
Which, by the way, not against the rules. You're allowed to be suspended.
Yes, you are. But they had actually been suspended a previous time for colluding in a high roller tournament. I don't know if it was a live event or not. It was one of their, swanky tournaments, but they got thrown out before the final was held.
Can I? I'm sorry. You go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you. I have an epic kind of rant bomb I want to drop on this, but I want to let you finish your point first. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, my point is about DraftKings handling of this and then what it means for you, the average Joe DFS player.
Right.
So for DraftKings, they could end this immediately. They could end this problem by doing one of two things, but they won't. Number one is they can obviously lower the amount of max entries to under, in my opinion, under 100 is very fair for any one player. It's
right. You're only asking for and inviting this sort of thing to happen when you make your max entry so high.
Yes. I know it's impossible to police, but that would reduce it tremendously.
And it's just not worth your time, to be honest. If you don't have a certain mathematical percentage chance of actually winning the $1 million because the prize is so top heavy, so many folks will be deterred and discouraged from actually doing something like this. It's only because you can put so many lineups in. Once you hit that critical mass, it's like, okay, we'll invest $100,000 because we have an X percentage chance of coming out as, people who have $500K apiece or whatever.
Yes. And then, oh, by the way, since I wrote these notes, there was an update to the...
of course there was.
Of
course there was another update.
DraftKings said that their play was totally fine because they told DraftKings that they were not sharing the prize money.
Oh, well, by all means, then, by the way, I'm going to tell you right now that I don't have a beard. I'm not a person. But it's totally fine because I'm telling you right now.
Okay. But the other, DraftKings could either reduce the entry limits, that would eliminate this problem. They could also eliminate all scripting, which they could say, hey, you can enter 250 times, but you have to enter a CAPTCHA after each lineup you put in. And you can't use a script to upload lineups automatically. It would totally, if somebody could do the 300 lineups like that, doing them by hand.
More power to them.
More power to them. I would have no problem with that. But the bottom line here, read between the lines, DraftKings is not going to do this. Everybody knows in DFS that the majority of the entry fees come from a very small minority of players with big bankrolls.
Right. And this is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
They're actually would be taking money out of their own pockets, and they really just can't afford to do that right now. And that's why DraftKings terms of service are vague on purpose, so they can, wade through the improprieties without having to rule with an iron fist.
Yeah, and just let me, real quick, I'm about to explode. I'm about to explode, because this is obviously a topic considering my history, who most of you already know. If you don't, Google Crazy Gaby, New York Times, and any other number of topics that are along these lines, and it shouldn't be too hard for you folks to figure out where I stand. But this is, in a nutshell, what you just said, what I've said from the beginning. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not anyone's out to get anyone. It's simple economics. You could see from day one that what was happening was an artificial daily fantasy bubble, economic bubble was being created by allowing these massive amounts of entry fees aided by scripting and automated processes from people who are not playing on a fair playing field. And I said this from day one. I'm not smarter than anyone else. Other people who are smarter than me said this from day one. I just happen to be more vocal about it. That's all, so take from that what you will. If you think it's honorable, it's honorable. If you think it's stupid, you think it's stupid, whatever. But I happen to be vocal about it, and all I said was, you're basically painting yourself into a corner now by giving the public and your investors this perception that you as a company are much larger and much more profitable and much more popular than you actually are. So once you actually get stuck in this cycle, you have to continue to, A, feed new players into the system, which means spending ridiculous amounts of advertising money. That's a bit misleading as well. I think we all agree. And then you also have to continue upping the ante on how many entries you're allowed into prize pools, because it's not very appealing. And frankly, the investors are going to wonder what the fuck just happened if you offer these massive prize pools now, and then the prize pools start to get smaller, even though you're still trying to convince people that your company is still growing. And I think this, more than any singular decision that we could pick apart, was the biggest folly of the daily fantasy industry, and the one I think that will continue to haunt people like Jason Robbins, Nigel Eckles for years to come, is by creating this artificial growth at the very beginning of everything. They essentially killed whatever long-term growth and profitability they could have had. At least they harmed it greatly. And so basically, in summary, what I'm saying as far as something actionable to all of you folks who are listening is that this isn't going to change. Like, DraftKings is going to continue to be morally ambiguous about all of these issues. As you said, the terms of service being very vague. Same as FanDuel. what you see is what you get at this point. None of them have changed. Their conscience hasn't convicted them overnight, and they've decided to come out. And I don't even think it's that they want to be good or that they want to be bad or that they're trying to rip anyone off. They literally have no choice but to continue down the path they started down, or they will not survive. And so take from that what you will, but just know that what you get is what you get. And this advice that John just gave a moment ago is extremely valuable, because you're not going to get transparency from these companies, regardless of if they want to at this point or not. It's just not a feasible option.
Well, did you get it all out?
Yeah, I got it all out. I had to listen. I've been reading these threads. I've been looking on Twitter. I'm obviously not quite in the limelight anymore for DFS, so I don't really have much of an outlet to talk about these things. But that's my piece on all of that. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Well, what you said actually really ties into how I want to finish this up.
Okay.
I did write a note in here about it was only a little over a year ago that Max Delury, who's now known as Sahil Sood,
the Channing Frye incident.
Yeah, well, no, this is actually during baseball season last year. He put 888 entries into a GPP before scripting was even allowed. That or was considered legal.
Yeah.
And that was only a year ago, and it's funny how everybody's even forgotten about that. And there's so many people that have had such an unfair advantage. You wonder why. I'm going to say this very quickly, then we're going to move on. But I started playing daily fantasy in 2007, so it's been almost 10 years now, and there's so many good players that are gone, and you wonder why. What happened to all these good players?
Where'd they go?
A smart fantasy player and a smart gambler knows that when it's not an attractive wager, when it's not an attractive situation, you pass. And that's what a lot of these people did. They realized that their edge was gone, especially when all this automation came in.
Yeah, like when Candia basically lost the GDP of a small third world nation in basketball over the course of a year.
Don't get me started.
And probably decided that it was not a good idea to continue.
Yeah.
I'm
going to wrap this up now. And my personal / professional advice for those of you that are playing DFS in general is to play the smaller tourneys, single entry, but just the smaller prize pools, unless you can compete dollar-wise with the big syndicates out there. If you can play with the big boys, otherwise let the big boys fight each other. Let them lose rake to the site. Don't give your money to these people that have resources beyond, Now, there's always going to be, in every big tournament, there's going to be a percentage, which I would say is a minority percentage, whether it's 10% or 25% or 33%, I don't know. But what I call the dollar and a dream entries, those are people that want the sweat for $1 million, and they're paying for the sweat. Their chances of winning are probably minuscule. Every once in a while, a single bullet wins. And I'm sure.
And by the way, I was about to say, every time a single bullet wins, there's going to be an article and 5 podcasts about it at Roto Grinders, and they're going to talk about how see anybody with a chip in a chair. That's the one thing. Just understand this. I like Roto Grinders. Their lineups app particularly. If they didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do a lot of what I do on the road for MLB. They have great products. I highly recommend all of you go there to use certain aspects of the site. But with that same transparency and honesty from myself, also comes transparency and honesty the other way. If you don't think that they're filling your head with a giant fucking plate of propaganda when they do shit like that, you are one of the sheep, my friend. One of the sheep.
This is the point I'm trying to make, is that if you're an average Joe DFS player, which I consider myself to be an average Joe these days, I was I was a whale 5 years ago, but not anymore.
You were feared. You were like Voldemort 5 years ago, I remember.
I need to go back to whatever school that's called.
Yeah. Hogwarts, I think it is.
Okay, Hogwarts, that's right. So if you're an average Joe DFS player like I am, there's always that attraction to play the big prize pool. I just avoid it. I'll give you an example. Last summer, I played NASCAR DFS, and I played the $200,000 turn. It was only $3 entry for the $200,000 prize. But I also played a very small $5 and $9 tournament, and I won the $5 and the $9 tournaments. But I lost. I didn't lose. I cashed the monster one. But their people are just dumping all their money into these big prize pool entries that actually have higher rake. than some of these smaller ones. And I would rather take the small profit any day. So I'm not going up against the syndicates and their max entries myself. It's up to every individual to do what they want to do, but learn how to build a high floor lineup, like a good cash lineup, and then start messing with some small tournaments and see how you do. Some people are better tournament players than others. But anyway, we talked an awful lot about that, and
yeah, people find that interesting. That's good stuff. Yeah. That's much better than green algae in the Olympic pool from the beginning of the podcast. So I think people will forgive us for talking about that.
No. I mean, I think it's important that we can glean some information for DFS players. You know, there's obviously people that just like CFL listening, but that they can take and use in other disciplines.
And I think actually what I might do is I might cut this little actual part of the discussion out, and I might actually make it its own little separate mini podcast, because I think there's a much larger, and I might put it in my personal podcast feed, because I think there's a large swath of folks who would actually appreciate that little bit of discussion beyond, like you said, just the people who like CFL. Howdy, folks. Gabriel Crazy Gaby Harbor here, founder of Fear the Beard Media. Are you a fantasy sports fan? If so, I've got an amazing offer for you. Rosters.com allows players to draft a new team every day, which is basically the most enjoyable aspect of traditional fantasy sports. This is called daily fantasy sports, and you may have heard about two of the leading companies, FanDuel.com and DraftKings.com. I can't personally vouch for them the way I can for the team at Rosters.com, though. The entire staff cares deeply about each player's experience, which is why I trust them to take care of you. And get this, here's an offer you won't find anywhere else. If you sign up and deposit $20 right now at Rosters.com using promo code CRAZY, you'll receive an additional $20. For those of you counting at home, that's a total of $40 you can use to enter contests right away when you deposit just $20. Again, to cash in on this offer, simply sign up now and deposit $20 using promo code CRAZY at Rosters.com, and their team will credit you an additional $20.
All right, let's move on to 3-down football then.
All right, fair enough. Let's move on to some good old CFL. This is where I decided to take a back seat again. I'm not used to, by the way, getting so much airtime on the CFL podcast, so it's a little strange for me. All right, Montreal at Edmonton, -7 for Edmonton here, 51.5 point total. How are we feeling?
Okay, well, you got to like Edmonton to come. They're on a 3-game losing streak. You got to like them at home here. I'm talking about them winning outright. I'm not talking about them covering, but the Alouettes are a complete mess. I talked about them a little bit earlier. Darrell Walker he got shut down last week, and I expect him to have a big week this week. Darius Bowman was the leading receiver last week with like 10 catches for 96 yards. I said Edmonton was only able to complete a lot of short passes. But I think Edmonton's defense has given up a lot of scoring, a lot of yards all year long. Edmonton was up 31-7 at home against Hamilton, and Hamilton came back and won. So I like Deron Carter this week. Montreal is the only player on the team that I would recommend outright. But I think a sneaky play might be Kevin Glenn at quarterback, because if Deron Carter has a big day, somebody's got to throw him the ball.
Right.
And Kevin Glenn's the guy, and I think he's priced right around 7,500. So he has the potential to put up 30 or more, at that low price. So I like that as a sneaky play this week. And very much like the over here, I would like to get it at 50. Anything 50.5 or less, I think, is a good look for the over here, just because Edmonton gives up so many points this year. If Montreal can put up 20, I think that 50.5 is an easy hit here. Quick and easy. There's really not much else to talk about in this game.
All right, that might be the shortest game analysis you've given in all the previews so far this year.
Well, it's just that there's so, like, on the Edmonton side, it's the studs, the regular that I've talked about every week. And on the Montreal side, it's pretty much stay away from everybody but Deron Carter.
Now, is this more of a product of just this particular game, or is it that we're starting to just figure out naturally a little more as the season progresses?
Well, I think that you have, if a team's healthy and all their first-string guys are going, that it's pretty common sense that the studs, the top 3 receivers, the quarterback, and the running back, depending on the team, are the go-to guys. When I talk about somebody else, I mentioned this is a play this week. It's because it's somebody getting looks or somebody getting run that they're not usually getting. So, and as a matter of fact, this next game is a very good indicator of that.
All right, Winnipeg at Toronto, -4 for Toronto in this one, 49.5-point total here.
So we talked about Winnipeg being really improved with Nichols at quarterback the last 2 weeks. So if you believe that the Bombers are going to keep scoring points, you got to like the +4 for Winnipeg here. However, Winnipeg has a slew of wide receiver injuries, and I expect to find at least one value. If you need a cheap wide receiver with potential, I expect to find a value option when the depth chart comes out for this game. So this is the exact point I was just talking about. Normally, I would say the top 3 Winnipeg wide receivers are Ryan Smith, Weston Dressler, and Jace Davis. But 2 of those guys are out, and their number 4 guy is out, and his name escapes me at the moment, Darvin Adams. So their return guy, McDuffie, is out or got hurt, so he's a questionable. So Winnipeg, you got to look at their depth chart and see who's playing and try to pick the winner, of a bunch of guys coming up at replacement level. So on the Toronto side of the ball, Ricky Ray's been out. He's still out for a couple more weeks. He had a knee injury. So Kilgore is the second-string quarterback. I really like Cody Fajardo, who's the third-string quarterback. He does the short yardage. But Kilgore has got the coach's approval as the starter going forward. Everybody faded him last week, and I said, it's hard. He came in for injured Ricky Ray in the fourth quarter of a game, and he went 0 for 3. And I'm like, how can you judge a quarterback's performance on 3 attempts?
Not only that, when coming into a game, it's so much different than when you have the whole week to prepare.
Yeah, you have a whole week to prepare, and they beat Ottawa outright with him starting at home. They get their first home win of the year, and he was much better than expected. Most of the pundits expected him to have a tough day. He didn't have, he had kind of that between 250, 300 yard, 1 touchdown day. No picks though, no fumbles. So, he had a good game against Ottawa, but he's facing, I think, a much tougher defense than Ottawa this week in Winnipeg. Kenny Shaw, the wide receiver for Toronto, is the great play. Torrey Gurley and Hazelton are the top 2 receivers from Toronto. They may both be out. They may both play. I haven't looked at the depth chart yet. I'll have to see. But if either one of those guys is missing, Kenny Shaw will be probably reasonably priced, like low 6,000s. Should be a good play. Love the over here. If you think Winnipeg could put up 20 points, because Toronto usually Toronto's the type of team that can score 30 and can give up 30. So if the game is close, I think it's going to be higher scoring. If the game is lopsided, in Toronto's favor, I think they're going to try to run the ball and not throw as much. So, but I do like the over. We'll see where the number goes. But that's Winnipeg. I'm leaning towards Winnipeg if you're going to bet on the game.
All right, that takes us to our next contest, Calgary at Saskatchewan. Plus 5.5 for Saskatchewan, 54.5-point total. Getting into another shootout-looking matchup here, it looks like.
Yeah, now these 2 teams played last week. This is a home and home. So that happens actually a lot in the CFL. You play everybody in your division at least twice, but there's a couple of teams you end up actually play 3 times because of the amount of games. You play everybody in the league twice. That's 16 games. Then you play 2 teams extra, so you play 2 teams 3 times in a year. Anyway, historically, home and homes very rarely end up in sweeps. So if you're a trend guy, which I'm not really a trend guy.
I'm pretty trendy. I like to think of myself.
Yeah, well, if you like to bet on trends.
Then, oh, okay, that's what you meant. Gotcha.
Yeah, yes, of course. So you would maybe look at Saskatchewan here to cover or maybe, win outright because it's very rare that they sweep the home and home series in the CFL. This is definitely that classic parity league trap game. Calgary just beat up Saskatchewan in a snoozer at home. Now they're meeting 1 week later on the road. So, it's tough to say that you expect the numbers say that they're going to crush them again, but it just doesn't always happen that way. I really don't trust Darian Durant at quarterback for Saskatchewan because of his injury history. I mentioned earlier that I don't think is mobile enough anymore. So as the DFS goes, I don't want to play him. On the other hand, Naman Roosevelt only had 18 yards, and he's the number one receiver. He has huge numbers at home. I would play him. He's got to have a bounce-back game. I would play him this week and maybe fade Rob Bagg, who had the 100-yard game last week. On the Stampeder side of the ball, it's the same players. Bo Levi Mitchell at quarterback, Jerome Messam at running back, Markway McDaniel at wide receiver. All three of those guys are studs. It's kind of like what fits into your price points for
right.
I like the over here if it starts to move, the number starts to move down. This number, I think Saskatchewan only scored 15 points last week. I think they're going to score more points this week. So if Calgary puts up 30 again and Saskatchewan puts up 28, that's 58 points. So if the total starts heading towards 57 or 58, I'd look at playing the under. We talked about that in a previous podcast. I like, when the number is below 45, I like to almost autoplay the over. When the number's 58 or higher, I like to almost autoplay the under. But if this number drops a couple of points, like it goes down to 52, I like the over here as well. I think it should be more competitive. I'm not sure if I believe Saskatchewan has it together enough to win this game outright, but if that gets up to 7 points, I might take Saskatchewan plus 7 at home.
All right, now we arrive at the last game of the day, or I guess of the week, rather. Hamilton at British Columbia, minus 2.5 here, 54.5 point total, another shootout it looks like we have on our hands. And tell me how you're feeling about this one.
Well, I think this is the feature game of the week. If this was my national broadcast, this would be the one. You have very exciting players on both sides of the ball. The biggest news is that Hamilton gets Zach Collaros back. He's their number one quarterback. He has been out since about week 10 of last season, maybe week 12 of last season. And if he's healthy, Hamilton is not going to be the turnover machine that they've been this year. Now, somebody that covers CFL DFS wrote an article this week about looking at defensive stats and which defenses to play, whether to pay up for defense or not. And he made a couple of good points. You shouldn't really pay up for defense, but I argue that the lowest defense is 4,500, the most expensive is 5,500. It's not like it really makes that much difference.
Right.
But here's the thing he said in the article, and I'm not trying to single him out, but I'm making a point of how you can get information from actually watching things instead of crunching numbers. And I'm a number cruncher guy. I like to crunch numbers.
Right on.
He gleaned from his information that you play the defense that's facing Hamilton because Hamilton turns the ball over so much. And they have turned the ball over a lot. But what I'm saying to you right now is, with Zach Collaros operating that offense, they will not turn the ball over as much. And people will pick up on that after he's back a couple of games. But if you're just looking at the raw stats, you're not going to get that same picture.
Right, you're going to think that, let's just go ahead and do it because it looks like there's a trend here. But in reality, that trend is not real. And
you have Masoli, playing in games where they're way behind, and he's throwing all the time, and he's throwing picks because he's trying to force the ball, and that that's something. If you know the competitive nature of the teams and which teams they can hang with and which teams they can't, you get a better feel for the matchup, and that's just something that number can't give you. So, but there's a lot of interesting things going on in this game. Zach Collaros is back. I'll talk about the Hamilton receivers in a second. On the BC side of the ball, they've had a couple of great weeks offensively, put up a lot of points, but I expect this one to be much more of a defensive battle. I think both defenses here are very good. And I think they're going to kind of fall the unsustainable path. They're not going to put up 40 points every game the rest of the way. I think this is one where BC is lower scoring. I might see this game as like a 24-17 or 28-20 type of game. Two very good defensive units. Now, BC has pretty much all of their weapons except for Nick Moore. I mentioned at the beginning he hurt himself celebrating. But they're starting running back Jeremiah Johnson. They're starting quarterback Jonathan Jennings, the obvious studs. They have Sean Gore and Manny Arsenault as their two wide receivers, top two wide receivers. Those are all options for you. On the Hamilton side of the ball, it'll be interesting to see which receivers that Zach Collaros, who is going to start, is going to connect with, who he has the most rapport with. And if you go by last year's numbers, it's Luke Tasker. And he missed a couple of days of practice. He is dressing. They say he is starting, but double check the depth chart before you roster him. I would also consider maybe Andy Fantuz, depending on the pricing. But there's going to be one guy that Zach Collaros is going to be his guy, the guy he goes to when he needs a big conversion. And pay attention to who that is, because you're not going to find that in the stats either. In the cursory stats anyway. This game is 2.5 point spread. I think it's going to be very competitive. I like BC at home to hold off Hamilton. If I was going to bet on the side, I like the under here, and I hope the total goes up. You do have the two best return guys in the league going against each other, in Brandon Banks and Chris Rainey. It'll be interesting to see if Brandon Banks gets some passes from Zach Collaros. I'll be keeping an eye on that for sure. But this is the game that I'm looking forward to the most, which means it's probably going to end up being the biggest dud of the week.
Yeah, you'll sit down, popcorn, everything else, and it's going to be awful.
It's in BC, so it's going to be one of those 10 o'clock Saturday night games. So at least I'll be home in my jammies. So if it turns out to be a snoozer, I can just fall asleep.
Well, there is the visual we want to leave everyone with this week. John in his jammies. Go ahead and soak that one in. As always, you can follow him at Buffalo Hold'em on Twitter. He lists his plays for the week there, as well as any daily fantasy advice you might have, so people can follow along. You also post the podcast on your personal YouTube channel of the same name, Buffalo Hold'em. And you can, of course, catch the podcast by subscribing on iTunes, Google Play, any other podcasting directory, or go to fearthebeardmedia.com directly. The post is up there each week as well. John, thank you again, and we will be back for Week 9, assuming nothing else crazy happens in either of our lives, to continue finishing out the rest of the season.
You have cornered the market on crazy, I think, right?
Well, it is in my name, so I don't like to lie to people.
Sorry, you trademarked crazy.
Trademark.
It's not a commodity. All right, well, thanks. We'll see you next time.
Take care, folks. Bye. Howdy, folks. This is Gabriel Crazy Gaby Harbor, founder of Fear the Beard Media. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider pledging your support for Fear the Beard Media at patreon.com/Fear the Beard Media. I've got big dreams for the Fear the Beard Media podcast network, but those can't be realized without the support from listeners like yourself. Your support will help us grow the Fear the Beard Media podcast network so we can help more talented broadcasters get their podcasts on the air. I've created some unique and hopefully entertaining reward levels for all of our patrons on Patreon, starting from as low as just $1 of support per month. It would mean the world to all of us if you chose to pledge your support at patreon.com/Fear the Beard Media. Thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, or through any other major podcast directory. Head over to fearthebeardmedia.com and check out all the podcasts on the Fear the Beard Media podcast network. If you're interested in starting a podcast or joining the Fear the Beard Media podcast network with your current podcast, email us at fearthebeardmedia@gmail.com. We'd love to get you on our network, absolutely free, no cost to you. Follow us on Twitter and Snapchat at FearBeardMedia and on Instagram at Fear the Beard Media. Until next episode, take care.